into court. My mother told me not to even mention it, said people like us didn't invite official attention. What did you see? Caleb asked, keeping his voice as soft as possible. A car, Jonah replied, eyes distant. Dark, maybe blue, parked a little crooked under her streetlight. It wasn't there when I walked home from my friend's place. It was there when I looked out before going to sleep. And I think I saw a figure at her door. Could have been anyone. Could have been someone bringing her something or just checking on her. I just knew it didn't feel usual. Why did it feel that way? Jonah hesitated. Because Elena didn't usually have people over that late. Her light would be off. That night it stayed on. And I had this feeling right here. He tapped his chest like I should remember it, like it meant something. Did you recognize the person? Caleb asked. Another silence, longer this time. The shop around them filled it with the dull rhythm of tools and distant voices. I thought I did, Jonah admitted. I told myself I was wrong. If I was right, it would mean thinking of someone in a way I didn't want to. So I decided it was a stranger. That was easier. For years, that's the version I stuck to. Caleb didn't press him for a name. Not yet. He understood that pushing at this delicate point might cause Jonah to retreat, to build his old defenses higher. What made you write the note? He asked instead. Jonah gave a short, humorless exhale. My daughter became a teacher. Different town, different school. But when she moved into a small house on a quiet street, I kept seeing that porch light from years ago. The one that never went off. I thought if something ever happened to her and some kid stayed quiet because he didn't want trouble, I couldn't live with that thought. So you wrote, but you didn't sign. I wanted to do the right thing without being pulled back into the whole thing, Jonah said. I thought maybe the paper would be enough. That someone would read it and know what to do. It wasn't courage, just a compromise with my own conscience. Caleb listened, nodding not just the words but the way Jonah's shoulders gradually relaxed as he spoke, as if numbing his long-held hesitation offered a kind of fragile relief. In every conversation he had around Elena's case, from Ruth to Jonah, to the former neighbor who insisted she remembered Elena smiling the day before her passing, Caleb recognized the same pattern. People had crafted personal narratives to survive their proximity to something they couldn't fully understand. They decided what they believed, not because of solid evidence, but because belief offered structure where uncertainty felt unbearable. He realized he was not just investigating a single night in 1985. He was sifting through layers of human self-protection. What did it mean, he wondered, for a town to live for decades with an unresolved story at its center? Did it make them more compassionate or more cautious? Did it teach them to look closer at one another or to look away faster? The physical clues were gone. The truths that remained lived inside expressions that shifted when he mentioned certain names, in the pauses before answers, in the sighs that followed them. To get closer to what had happened to Elena, he had to understand not just who might have walked up her front steps that evening, but why an entire community had chosen to live with half-answers. In the quiet, after each conversation, he would return to his office and study Elena's photograph again. Her half-closed eyes made her look as though she were caught between past and future, between what had already happened and what she had feared might come. She knew something, he found himself thinking one night, feeling the weight of that intuition. Or someone knew something about her. He wasn't sure which possibility unsettled him more. That Elena had carried her own untold story to the end, or that someone else had held a piece of it and chosen, for reasons tangled in love, fear, or loyalty, not to speak. Either way, he understood one thing with growing clarity. This case would not be solved by discovering a stray fingerprint or a forgotten piece of fabric. It would be approached, if at all, by gently loosening the knots that people had tied around their own memories. By accepting that, in the end, the truth he uncovered might offer no one the comfort they believed they wanted. Caleb soon discovered that the relationships surrounding Elena were shaped not by confrontation or visible conflict, but by quiet dependency, soft bonds formed in stillness, the kind that looked harmless yet carried deep currents beneath the surface. As he revisited the old neighborhood, he found that nearly everyone who had known her seemed to speak with a kind of tender caution, as though they were protecting not just their memories, but themselves. There was the woman who lived across from Elena, Myra Hernandez, who had often exchanged polite greetings with her in the evenings. When Caleb arrived at Myra's home, she opened the door only halfway, her posture gentle yet guarded. She spoke slowly, pausing between thoughts as if listening inwardly before allowing each word to leave. Everyone liked her, Myra said, though her voice held a tremor of uncertainty. But liking someone doesn't mean you truly understand them. Caleb sensed hesitation behind her calm expression. Did Elena have anyone she spent more time with? He asked. Myra looked down at her hands. There was someone who visited on occasion, not often but enough that I noticed. A man tall, quiet, the kind who blends into a room. I never saw them speak outside. He always entered quickly as though he preferred not to be seen. She stopped, blinking as if her recollection brushed against something she wished she had forgotten. Did they seem close? Caleb asked, his voice low. Myra hesitated, then shook her head slowly. It wasn't closeness, not exactly. It was something delicate, as if they shared an understanding they didn't want to examine too closely. Caleb leaned back in his chair. A visitor who hurried inside, who avoided attention, someone who might have blended easily into the fabric of the town. Yet the way Myra described him didn't feel like the presence of a threat. Instead, it carried the faint outline of someone grappling with unspoken emotion. Caleb moved on. The next conversation brought him to Elena's former colleague, Daniel Reeves, who had worked alongside her at the school. He greeted Caleb with warmth, but there was a distance in his smile, as though he carried a memory he could not fully face. I admired Elena, Daniel said, sitting across from Caleb in a small cafe. His hand tightened lightly around his coffee mug. She had a way of seeing people without pushing them, a kindness that felt patient. Did you spend much time with her outside of school? Caleb asked. Daniel's hesitation was subtle but unmistakable. Sometimes, he admitted softly. We talked after work, walked home together once or twice, but I never knew what she carried privately. No one did. Caleb sensed a quiet longing woven through Daniel's words, something unacknowledged but deeply felt. It wasn't suspicion in the traditional sense. It was emotional complexity, the kind that could shift perceptions without meaning to. When Caleb gently asked if Daniel had ever visited her home, Daniel looked away, a faint unease crossing his features. No, he said after a pause, or at least, I don't remember going inside, not at night. Caleb caught the slight emphasis on the final word. The more he listened, the more he realized that each person who had known Elena held their own version of her, affection, admiration, unspoken yearning. These were not motives in a traditional sense, but they held a kind of emotional gravity. And gravity, Caleb knew, could pull people toward actions or silences they later wished they had understood better. The relationships surrounding Elena did not point toward a single clear direction. Instead, they created a circle of gentle contradictions, fondness mixed with uncertainty, closeness shadowed by distance, truth softened by time. Every person Caleb spoke with seemed to carry a quiet ache, a lingering sense that they had once stood near someone luminous and had somehow, unknowingly, contributed to her loneliness by not asking the questions that mattered. And as each layer peeled away, the story grew no clearer, only deeper, more fragile, more human. 5. Old secrets unfold, revealing betrayal and hidden personal motives. The deeper Caleb ventured, the more he sensed that the truth was not buried beneath dramatic events but woven into quiet choices, decisions made softly, in private, with no intention of causing harm. Yet harm, he knew, could grow from the smallest seeds of secrecy. It was a forgotten journal entry that shifted the ground beneath him. The journal belonged to Ruth Sims, the retired school principal. She had kept it for decades, not out of attachment, but because she couldn't bring herself to discard the record of her life during those years. When Caleb gently asked if she had anything written from the time Elena had worked with her, Ruth reluctantly searched through her attic and handed him a small, leather-bound book. "I don't know if it will help," she said quietly, "but I've held onto it all these years without fully understanding why." Caleb opened the journal to a page dated a few weeks before Elena's passing. The handwriting was steady, reflective. "EM came to my office today. She seemed unsettled, though she spoke calmly. She said there was something she needed to take responsibility for. She didn't explain. She only said she feared someone might misinterpret her actions. I asked if she was in any difficulty. She smiled, softly, almost apologetically, and said she simply needed time." Caleb stared at the entry, feeling the weight of its ambiguity. What had Elena meant? What responsibility was she carrying? He found another entry, written later. "DR seems increasingly troubled. I wonder if there is something he is not saying. He and EM share a silence that feels heavy. I hope they find clarity soon. DR Daniel Reeves." Caleb returned to Daniel with these quiet revelations. Daniel's face tightened when he read the entries, not with fear but with something more delicate, regret. "Something happened between us," Daniel admitted softly, setting the journal down. "Not something dramatic, just an intimacy of understanding that neither of us knew how to handle. We grew close in ways that were never spoken aloud. I admired her deeply, perhaps more than I realized." "Did she admire you?" Caleb asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I think so, but admiration is complicated. It asks for more than we know how to give. I think she felt responsible for something she believed might affect me, but she never explained what." His voice softened even further. "I kept things from her too, parts of myself I wasn't ready to share. Maybe that's the betrayal she felt, or maybe it was something else entirely." When Caleb left the cafe, he found himself walking with a strange heaviness. Every discovery felt like a whisper of truth wrapped around another layer of uncertainty. There were no clear deceptions, only partial truths offered with gentle hands, hidden motives shaped not by malice but by fear, affection, or a longing that neither person had known how to express. And somewhere among these fragile confessions, Elena had stood quietly, carrying a weight that did not belong solely to her. 6. Twist exposes the innocent as manipulative and morally corrupt. The moment of realization did not arrive dramatically. It emerged gradually, like a shadow lengthening across a familiar surface, changing the meaning of what had once seemed harmless. It began when Caleb revisited Jonah, the man who had written the anonymous note. Something in Jonah's earlier hesitation kept tugging at Caleb, the subtle way his voice caught when he mentioned the visitor on Elena's porch, the way he seemed to shrink into himself when recalling his youth. This time, Caleb approached carefully, allowing Jonah to speak at his own pace. I need you to think back, Caleb said softly. Not about the figure you saw, but about yourself, where you were emotionally, what you hoped others believed about you. Jonah looked startled by the question. Why does that matter? Because memories are shaped by who we want to be, Caleb replied, not just what we see. Jonah stared at him, eyes widening with something like recognition, perhaps even relief, as though someone had finally broken open a door he'd been holding closed. You think I wanted to be part of it, he whispered. I think, Caleb said gently, you wanted to matter to someone. Jonah's breath shuddered, barely audible. I admired her, he admitted. More than I should have, maybe. I was young. She was kind to me once, just a small thing. She gave me a book when I seemed lonely. I kept it for years. He paused, voice fragile. When I saw someone at her door that night, I told myself it was wrong, that she deserved someone who understood her, someone who cared as much as I did. But I was just a boy, and the world felt unfair in ways I couldn't explain. Caleb felt a quiet chill, not fear, but the uneasy recognition of how longing can twist itself into justification. Did you ever speak to her that night? He asked. Jonah shook his head, but the hesitation in his eyes told a different story. It wasn't a lie, just a memory softened into something safer. I followed her sometimes, Jonah whispered. Not closely, just from far enough that she wouldn't notice. I liked knowing she was near, even if she didn't know me well. That night, I walked past her house twice. I told myself it was coincidence. He pressed his palms together, as if trying to keep something from slipping through. I didn't go to her door, he said softly, but I wanted to. I stood across the street watching that visitor go inside. I felt replaced. Caleb understood then. The note had not been written by a man seeking honesty. It had been written by someone seeking absolution, someone who had shaped his own role into something gentler, more innocent than it had been. Jonah's memory was not a neutral observation. It was a perspective shaped by longing, envy, and the soft edges of self-deception. And yet none of it pointed to direct harm, only to emotional complexity, human fallibility, quiet obsession. Caleb did not accuse Jonah of anything. There was nothing to accuse. Instead, he simply listened as the man unraveled years of his own myth-making, revealing the subtle ways in which admiration had shaded into entitlement, and how guilt had woven itself into his identity without him fully noticing. The twist was not dramatic. It was human. The person who seemed most harmless was the one whose perspective had colored the entire case, not through lies, but through the small, powerful distortions of unacknowledged desire. And as Caleb walked away from Jonah's home, he felt the story shift again, not toward certainty but toward a deeper, more complicated truth. 7 concludes with open-ended moral tone. Hiding truth saves someone. The final days of Caleb's investigation unfolded like the slow closing of a book, quietly, without resolution, yet with a soft ache that lingered long after the last page was turned. He had gathered every account, every emotional thread, every small confession. He had listened to voices shaped by time, softened by regret, protected by fragile self-understanding. And what emerged was not a single narrative but a mosaic of partial truths. Elena's passing remained suspended between possibilities, not because of lack of effort, but because her story had been absorbed into the hearts of those who knew her, each holding a different fragment of understanding. Some believed she had carried private burdens. Others believed she had shared unspoken affection with someone who could not meet her halfway. Still others believed she had been visited that night by someone who loved her too quietly or too late. Caleb realized that revealing every truth he had uncovered would not bring clarity. It would only reopen wounds that had been gently stitched shut by time. He returned to Ruth Sims and shared his thoughts with her. She listened without interruption, her gaze steady and unreadable. When he finished, she folded her hands and nodded slowly. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the kindest thing we can do is leave the edges of a story untrimmed." Caleb understood. He closed the case once more, not with the certainty of a solved mystery, but with the acceptance that not every truth needs to be spoken aloud. Some truths live better in quiet memory, where they can soften rather than harm. He placed Elena's file back into its box, but before closing the lid, he looked once more at her photograph. Her half-closed eyes still seemed to hover between moments, as though she herself were deciding what to reveal and what to keep. As he turned off the light in his office, Caleb felt the weight of the story settle into him, not heavy but present. A reminder that some endings are not meant to be resolved, only carried. Outside, the evening air held a stillness that felt almost familiar. Somewhere a porch light glowed, not as a signal, not as a clue, simply as a quiet echo of a life that had touched many others in subtle ways. In the end, truth had come forward, but gently, reshaping the past without breaking it. And the unanswered questions remained, not as failures, but as reflections of the human heart itself, delicate, uncertain, and endlessly layered. Caleb walked into the fading light, not knowing whether he had brought comfort or simply stirred old echoes. But he knew this. Some stories remain open not because they are unfinished, but because they are too deeply human to ever close.